To everyone joining us from around the world, thank you and welcome to this celebration of youth. 2 days ago, when I was preparing my opening statement and sat down to ponder on what I should say to welcome the audience and set the tone of this meeting, I was unsure. Should my message be of inspiration or should it be more celebratory? Just then, my phone rang, a notification. I knew what it was. It was the breaking news alert from the BBC app. Did something happen to the Queen? No brownie points to those who guess that I'm head over heels for the royal family. The notification was even more irksome than my initial thought. It read, Code Red for Humanity. Now, thanks to a feeble internet connection and an anticipation of the loading of the article, my imagination was on overdrive. Nuclear winter, another pandemic, an alien invasion, or a zombie apocalypse. Your basic doomsday menu. 2020 really prepared me for the worst. Finally, the article loaded. And it turns out I have a great, if not accurate, imagination. The content didn't surprise me though. The article was referring to a report released a few minutes ago by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. The report gave us a chilly reality on the situation of our planet. Quite ironic that I say chilly when the Earth keeps on heating. In strong terms, the IPCC blames us and our influence to be the detrimental factors in our fight against climate change. So what's next? Do we take this as just another report and brush it aside? Or do we take responsibility of what we've done to our planet and prevent further destruction? The decade of action is our time to make a difference. It is a call to the youth of the world to get motivated and take action. And today's panel brings out the best of youth innovation. This panel underlines the importance of youth action and strengthens our position as the most powerful community on this planet. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Spotlight session hosted as part of the Youth Lead Innovation Festival, hosted by the Office of the Secretary General's Envoy on Youth in celebration of International Youth Day 2021. Since 2015, the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network Youth Initiative has been actively empowering young people to lead the way for a more sustainable, brighter future for everyone. We remain committed to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Agreement. With a vibrant community, relevant educational and resources, and impactful innovations, SDSN Youth has transformed itself from an organization into a movement. And I couldn't have been prouder of being part of this community of change makers and leaders. On the panel today, we have Julia Blocher, the president of the International Youth Federation, a doctoral researcher at the Potsdam Institute of Climate Impact Research, a globally leading research center based in Germany. Julia is an accomplished advocate for climate action and youth empowerment, having published research on the intersection of social, political, and environmental factors in human migration in the context of climate change. We're very honored to have you here with us today. Joining her is Brighton Koma, the Global Director of SDSN Youth, a prominent youth activist and social entrepreneur. Born and raised in Zambia, Brighton is a graduate of the Columbia University with a track record of leadership experience working at the intersection of sustainable development, corporate sustainability, business development, communications, and youth empowerment. He was awarded the Queen's Young Leaders Award by Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth in 2015. Brighton also received the WWF International President's Award, in addition to being appointed as a Young One World Ambassador. Thank you, Brighton, for being with us here today. Joining Julia and Brighton on the panel is a youth innovator, Chianika Nakasama. Chianika is the co-founder and chief financial officer of Fourth Line Limited, an agribusiness and social enterprise that enables smallholder farmers to generate year-round cash flow via sustainable beekeeping. Fourth Line's mission is to promote smart and agricultural climate farming practices in rural communities in order to help farmers increase agricultural productivity and income, making rural communities more resilient and mitigating climate change. It's a pleasure to host you here. Finally, we have Siomi Asiverdo, Siomi is the founder of Barkila Plus 20, which is a youth-led NGO whose mission is to educate and empower children and youth at the cross-section of climate change, biodiversity, and water conservation in Colombia and the Latin American region. Barranquilla Plus 20 promotes advocacy and demands climate-effective actions at the local, national, and international levels based on the defense of human rights, nature, and ecosystems. Thank you to all our panelists for being with us here today. Dear audience, you're free to send us any questions through the question and answer box throughout the session. And please make sure that you keep filling us with questions because we have kept enough time for you. With that being said, let's begin. We'll start with you, Julia. Almost your entire professional career has revolved around youth empowerment and climate action. What's the inspiration behind your career, and where did it all start?
Thank you so much, Meyer. Thank you. And thanks again to the Sustainable Development Solutions Network for inviting me to join this panel today, and for really supporting me and also the International Youth Federation in general over the past several years. And we really very much appreciate it. So as mentioned, I'm the president of the International Youth Federation, which is an international NGO based in the UK. We now have more than 170 accredited organizations across all 5 continents. So we're the network of youth that we've helped to build, and the peer-to-peer support that we are a part of. But I'm also a researcher in a climate change institute, as was mentioned. And what really brought me to my passion for addressing climate change is through my research. I was doing research in developing countries on migration and also refugee movements. And when I was in Tanzania in particular, I met a number of young pastoralists, and they were telling me about the issues that they face on a daily basis, dealing with increased dryness and shifting of rain seasons and so on. And it really hit me that the people in the world who have the least to do with climate change, who have contributed the least to emissions over decades, are now the ones who are suffering the most from the impacts of climate change. And this is really an injustice, and there's no real other way to describe it. And this applies to people in developing countries in particular, but even at young people in these developing countries, because it's young people who lack the resources to cope with climate change impacts and then rebuild afterwards, as compared to older people who are very often the ones who are holding the purse strings and are able to bounce back a bit easier than young people are. So I've now, as Mayor has said, dedicated my life to working on this issue, in particular by bridging the gap between the science of climate change and the social science that we know about how communities are being affected by climate change impacts, and trying to make good, effective, and useful policy out of this. So we really want to see more concrete action, but this concrete action has to be based in evidence. And this is where I hope that myself and other young people like me in the innovation space and research space can make a big difference. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We'll move to you, Brighton. Your story began with a radio broadcast at the age of 14 to raise awareness. And what happened after that?
What happened essentially, Myra, is a realization that we are at a stage where all of us, irrespective of where we are, need to take urgent action. Starting as a radio broadcaster and community organizer at the age of 14 reminded me that it's everybody's responsibility to reverse the changing climate. Of course, after having been a community organizer and radio broadcaster, my mission was to create a society where humans live in harmony with nature. That also includes the corporations, the big extractive industries that invested in my community in the peri-urban parts of Zambia where I was born, where mining seems to be the driving engine of GDP. So afterwards, the mission was on how can we build a huge movement of young people that have got the right tools and the right skills to be able to take action on the changing climate. And when I reflect back today, when I immersed myself in understanding the different parts of the IPCC report, I realized that the Earth's natural carbon sinks, which are the forests and the oceans, are also beginning to max out their ability to absorb carbon and slowly prevent themselves from reducing the warming. And what that means is that the system that for so many years have played a huge part in putting the brakes on warming are less and less able to absorb the same proportion of greenhouse gases as temperatures continue to rise. So the mission was to entirely galvanize youth interest, support them and guide them through a pathway to reducing all these changes that we are seeing to our one thing we share in common, which is planet Earth.
That's wonderful. The youth-led festival hosted by the Office of the Secretary General's Envoy on Youth focuses on highlighting the role of young innovators around the world. Xiaomi, you started Barranquilla Plus 20 in 2012. How has your journey been thus far, and what lessons have you learned on the way?
Thank you so much, Mir, and thank you to everyone that is in this conversation. I see a lot of people very active. Thank you guys for being here and joining, this kind of dialogues that we have. Barranquilla Más 20 or Barranquilla Plus 20 is inspired in the Rio Plus 20 process. So we've been working since 2012. It haven't been easy at all because that young community organizing has its own challenges. And we have 9 years, so it's like we learn a lot of things on how to sustain this movement, how to organize ourselves. We made mistakes too. We take advantages of the resources that we have for young people. For example, we're easy in involving people, getting resources, getting funding somehow. It's not it's one of the key barriers, but also since we have the youth power also to get the things done, and money is not that the obstacle, maybe to achieve what we want to accomplish in the climate arena. So I think that this has been a long journey in which I have also learned big important lessons and understand that climate change is not only a scientific or environmental issue, and that its complexity relies in the society, in the economics, in the policy. So this is a big intersectoral issue that we young people have also to promote this as a generation issue and an intergenerational issue, but also as an issue that is involving a lot of sectors. So this being one of our lessons too, because we just cannot talk to an audience that is maybe related to environment, but we need to open these dialogues and conversations and understand how the local people, the grassroots, the farmers, the rural people, all these are facing climate change, are facing their impacts, but have been also adapting to those changes historically. And they have a lot of knowledge too, local knowledge that has been, supporting them to survive. So I think that this is the complexity of the issue. It's just the beginning because we have seen that this is an issue that has a general or international attention since the 90s. That's why I also think that we are the climate generation, because most of us maybe are, born between the 90s, the 20s, and these are the first generations that understand that climate change is an important intergenerational issue that is not it won't happen in the future, but it's already affecting and compromising the development and the decisions and the way that we as young are organizing today and will organize ourselves in the future. So I'm also proud of this, that we are part of this first generation too, that understood that climate change is happening and that is taking action many years ago. We also have the commitment to get more people involved in this and to fight for climate equity and justice.
Thank you so much for that. We'll move to you, Chianika. Your expertise lies in the accounting and the auditing industry. What directed your passion towards social entrepreneurship, and where did your journey in social entrepreneurship with Fourth Line Limited begin?
Thank you very much, Ali, and I'm happy to be here. That's a nice question. As a young finance graduate, I remember in 2017, I had hopes and dreams of maybe working in a bank and in a well-established institution. But just a year later, in 2018, the country experienced untold and unwitnessed dry spell. We actually experienced low rainfall, and most farmers couldn't farm. And my community where I came from, many people couldn't actually plant maize, and they resorted to charcoal burning, and they witnessed huge hectares of land cut down, people burning trees. So I think to me that was like a deciding lines. It's saying, okay, I need to come in and do something to actually help people actually address this problem here. So that's where my journey started off. So I cooperated and worked with my fellow young innovators to start up an enterprise that actually is now involved in training farmers in beekeeping and trying to empower them with some activities that to make them to be resilient in the face of climate changes.
Wonderful. That's really inspirational to see that all four of you have journeys of your own and have such beautiful experiences, and we're really excited to see what you can share with us here today. So, Xiaomi, I'll start with you. The next question: that there are widespread misery, and the common narrative that remains is on the negative. The world is dying, trees are dying, the oceans are going away, we don't have food left. But how should one take this in the positive? How should you also come from Colombia, where there is widespread socioeconomic problems? So how should one person take this in the positive, and how should we work towards this, keeping in mind a common narrative that we need to achieve the goals set out by the Paris Agreement?
Yeah, that's a very important question, and definitely the reality of climate change is, it possesses negative impacts in most of the people, and we have already experienced this. I hear, like my colleagues, that they were talking about how they have faced climate change. I also, and my family and my community, I live in a coastal city, so we are very vulnerable to the climate impact and the climate variability because of floodings and also because of drought. So the reality is that all countries and all communities in the world has already experiencing climate change, but in a different way, of course. And that's why young people are important, because we can identify how climate change is impacting in our local areas, and how can we also provide some local responses. I think that this is one point that I want to raise, and is that we just can't wait to act globally, but we need to act locally. And this provides an opportunity for young leadership to arise and to build a movement that can understand the impacts, the negative influences, but also understand that climate change offers an opportunity to build a new narrative of economic growth, build a new narrative of development, build a new narrative of peace. So I feel like this is an important contribution that this problem is positing, because it's a problem, it's affecting a lot of people, it's affecting inequally women, children, and youth, for example, but also this possesses the opportunity for all of us, young people that are the majority of the population of the world, to act, to get educated in this issue too, understand how we are being affected in this, but also how can this be like the positive way to express our leadership, to convene together, to mobilize, and to act. Influence, for example, the policy and the advocacy area is one of, like the areas that I see that are important for young people, because if we are seeing climate action is like a willingness, it's part of the political discourses, political willingness, but we just not can like take the words granted. We need to have a formal things that can that can commit for achieving the global targets in climate action. So I think that the climate litigation, the climate policies, the climate advocacy is a very important sphere in which young people can be part of and can innovate, because we have the climate emergency declarations, we have the climate emergency laws, and I think that this is one way, at least, to guarantee that the climate change is an important issue in the local or the national or the global agenda for some years. And this is how we have learned in our experience in Barranquilla Más 20, because we have supported climate emergency policies, and at least we are securing that some cities in Colombia are committing to act for climate change in 12 and also 14 years. So we already have the plan, we already have the actions, we already have the legislative commitment, and it's an important opportunity that I wanted to, like maybe put in the spotlight for young people, because we also know that we can use media, we can use social networks, we can use research, or whenever a sphere that you are part of, you have to commit to act for climate change. And this is also important. You don't need to become like a particular field. You need to just mainstream climate action in all the knowledge, but also in the areas and in the ways that you are working. And this is important also because we know that climate anxiety and eco-anxiety is an issue that many young people have been facing because of the climate disasters and the climate emergency impacts. And it's important also that we can provide at least some relief. And that means we need to put our hands for climate action.
That's a wonderful way to look at it. Julia, my next question to you would be that we are in the middle of a global pandemic. Global health and the health of everyone, vaccines are the priority of the world and of every organization right now. So what role does climate change play in this? And I'm going to also mix this up with another question that we've got from one of our audience. Thank you, Dr. Khan, for sending in your question. Dr. Khan asks you that your PhD is linked between environment and mobility. So has COVID been a blessing in disguise for protecting the environment?
Wow, well, this is a difficult question indeed, but thank you so much for it. I think what I would try to say is I'm going to link a bit back to what Xiomara also already raised, which is this question of hope and the ability of youth and young people to adapt to the changes around them and also to bring positivity. And we saw the coverage of this recent IPCC report was very much, as you said, like a doomsday, everything is negative and so on. And I think that what youth can bring to this conversation that is really unique is that hope and that limitless ability to bring positivities to something. And I honestly think that the coverage of this IPCC report, as well as the coverage of COVID, is a little bit too negative. I'm getting kind of sick of this doomsday narrative, because as we know from research around the world, when people are faced with a seemingly intractable problem, they tend to turn off. And I think this is a communications issue, it's a science communications issue that we really can help solve as young people. We saw how people really were willing and able to come together as a community in local areas to address COVID, to wear masks, to get vaccinated, to help people who needed it most, to wait their turn for the vaccine so that those who are most vulnerable can get it first. And these are the kind of lessons I think we can also apply to the climate change movement. And especially that as young people, I think that we are really in a position to say that it's not too late to make a difference. We have few years, yes, but in the next decade, there are a number of things that we can do as young people to pressure our governments to take action. There's things that corporations can do. to make a big difference. A lot of these things are in the recent IPCC report in terms of decarbonization, shutting down coal plants. We've seen how China is gradually shutting down many coal plants over the next several years, which will make a big difference. There's carbon capture and storage that we can invest in. We need to have a feeling of hope, because it is not too late to make a big change, and it's not too late to avoid the worst effects of climate change and stay under 2 degrees, or better yet, under 1.5 degrees warming. I would say, as a half marathon runner myself, I would say, you don't start tomorrow to run a marathon. You start with 5K, and then you do a 10K, and then maybe you do 20, and then you can do your half marathon, and finally a full marathon if that's your thing. So we need to take the same approach to the climate crisis. We need to do all of the things. We need to choose a plate from each section of the menu to make a full meal. So there's no silver bullets, but we need to have a combination of things, and the science is there, and now these technologies are also cost effective, so it's not too late, and we need to make sure that our governments are aware of that and are taking appropriate action. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Brighton, I'd like to ask you that our generation has been called armchair advocates. We've been called people who are just talking but not acting upon it. And in the past couple of years, we've seen a flood of youth activists coming across the world. Now, while that's actually a very significant impact on how we view climate change and how everyone's talking about it, but what is the impact of this action, of this awareness, and of this advocacy on action? How should we be translating these awareness campaigns and advocacy campaigns into actual action that mitigates climate change?
That's a very important question, Maya, and I would want to take us back to 2015, when the international community agreed to keep global temperature rise in this century below 2 degrees and above pre-industrial levels. But most importantly, there was an agreement to pursue efforts to limit temperature increase to 1.5 degrees Celsius. The 1.5 threshold, which was agreed upon, was important because beyond this, we're going to experience a so-called tipping point, the positive feedback loop where global warming causes a permanent shift in Earth systems, locking in further warming. So when I reflect back on the last 6 years or so, I begin to realize that there are particular common threads among young people that are at the front line of addressing the climate crisis. I believe that irrespective of what approach you are using to contribute to reversing these efforts, they really matter. If it means advocating for more better policies in your community, advocating that there is accountability for legacy environmental liabilities and the change in policies, that really matters. If you are creating solutions that are beyond tourism, but focus more on ecosystem restoration, they really matter. If you are also working on protecting specific plant and animal species, they really matter. So all solutions and interventions really matter. But we need to also begin to embrace one common theme, which is collaboration. If I'm an advocate in Kathmandu, there might be individuals that are working on a similar issue in India, for example. How do we begin to embrace alliances and partnerships and collaboration? We've heard young people being labeled as being expressive. And whenever I hear such words, my response is, yes, we're expressive as young people. And there's nothing wrong with being expressive. We are vocal, and we are not like previous generations that saw things pass by, that saw industrialization leads to destruction of ecosystems and the one thing that we share in common, which is planet Earth. We are stopping at nothing to innovate. We are seeing young people that are investing in non-motorized transportation innovations, reducing the emission of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases. We're seeing young people that are looking at ways of thinking about easier means of educating communities on sustainable development goals. We see young people within SDSN Youth. We see young people within the International Youth Federation, young people that are part of the UN Envoy for Youth community. So I'm always excited when I hear people that come up with very strong opinions against those who are taking action, because instead of just being expressive and shooting down whatever young people are doing, why don't you do something as an individual? Why don't you take action? And what is more critical than anything is realizing that we don't need to apologize for expressing ourselves. We don't need to apologize for taking action. And I think it's a combination of practice and the ability to advocate for policies that brings action. Because with advocacy, we see that we can advocate for municipal government policies to change and bring impact at scale. With taking simple actions, we can build to this plethora of small solutions and actions that build together into a mountain of solutions. So I believe there is no one approach to addressing these challenges we are facing with. It's about using a plethora of approaches and working together as activists, as engineers, as innovators, as scientists to solve the world's greatest challenges.
Wonderful. And talking about action, Chianika, you set up Project Poland in Zambia. Now, your country has socioeconomic issues, there's political issues, there's widespread discrimination in the country that you live in. Now, how did you get people motivated to think about climate change, to think about sustainable beekeeping when they are more worried about about safety? So how does climate change play a role in all this? How did you get your project started, and what are the challenges that you faced?
Okay, yeah, I think to begin with, I can say that one thing that helped me to implement this project was I started in the community where I was known. And when the project itself started like bearing results, it attracted a lot of community and some people. So it gave us a bit of visibility, but still more, we were still like facing challenges in terms of financial. We couldn't scale the project across the country. So at some point, we actually limited it to one area, but actually making sure that we have some impact. And on top of that, we discovered that, when you're talking about climate change and you're trying to innovate to a community that actually don't understand what climate change really is, you come across culture barrier challenges, where some they will argue saying that, no, what? We have been doing this for years. You are born, you're born recently, so you can't come and tell us this. So you have to also bring on board influencers, people who can actually be trusted and so on and so forth. So I think that's the approach that actually we are taking now.
That's wonderful. Julia, I'll move to you. The hot topic right now is, of course, the IPCC report that's come out. And everyone's talking about how the report paints a grim picture of our planet. Now, at the same time, this report is made by experts. It's made by a panel which sits with vast experience in climate change, in research. Now, how do we link science and policy? Your field is also the same. How do you link science and policy and facts that can come to the youth or come to the general public into actionable items? Like, there are reports released every day, but how is this report different, and how should we tackle climate change from the science lab or from the library down to the streets to make action?
Thank you so much, Maya, for this interesting question. Yes, absolutely. This report, in a lot of ways, is the same as the report from 7 years ago. It has to be said. We're coming to the same conclusions as we were before, and communicating it in the same kind of doomsday way, which I think needs to change. It's time for us to highlight all of the huge amount of work that has gone into addressing climate change over the past decade. But what is different about this report, and I think is also very important, is that scientists appear to be, through the IPCC and also in their own communications directly with the media and with the public, are beginning to lessen up on this on being completely impartial when it comes to climate change, because it's time to now take a stand to say we are unequivocally contributing to climate change. Now we have very strong science that enables us to attribute specific extreme weather events to climate change and specific warming events and heat waves and floods, etc., to climate change. That science wasn't there a few years ago. Another thing that's different about this report and the one that we will get 6 months from now is we're beginning to integrate lived experiences into the narratives around climate change and into government discussions around climate change. So what we see in this report and what we will see in the next one is more discussion of people who are facing extreme weather, people who are moving in the context of climate change, being forced to leave their homes because of drought and crop failure. And this is something that, again, youth can really assist with this. I would, make a point here. If anybody tweets at me with their own personal experience of dealing with climate change and the way that they've managed to adapt, I will retweet you. We need to have more conversations about the lived experiences around climate change, and especially the way that youth are leading adaptation against climate change. But coming to really your first point, which is that this report is really a huge tool in bridging the gap between the science of climate change and the policies. And this is something that that youth and young people can really capitalize on, because the report is not just a summary of the science that's out there, although it is that, but it's also something that 195 governments have commented on and have agreed to, especially they negotiate to come to the conclusions in the summary for policymakers. So it's more than just a piece of science, it's also an advocacy tool. It's something you can take and say, you agreed to this and I need you to hold up your end of the bargain. This is something that the youth can lead, I think, and also use their voices to say, as youth, we are disproportionately affected by climate change because our generation and the ones below us will be dealing with impacts of climate change well after those who negotiated these agreements are gone. So we need to stand up for our own futures in a way. And so using the report as a basis, I think youth can really make their voices louder. Thank you.
Thank you. Xiaomi, you're from Colombia, a region which also has a lot of socio-political issues. It has a widespread gang-related violence and so on and so forth. Now, when it comes to something like climate change or when it comes to human rights, there isn't a lot of talk about it because there is talk about something else. People want to focus on something else. So how do you motivate the youth to come and talk about climate change, talk about human rights, about civil liberties, and at the same time also talk about how they should take action in a country or actually in a world where we are living through a global pandemic? At the same time, I'd like to also add another question that we've received, that what role does social media play in all this? Your organization has a very active social media presence. So what is the role of social media in empowering the youth and also at the same time forming this coalition of people that want to work towards climate change?
Yeah, thank you for that question too. I think that it's important to say that the world saw the protests and the massive protests that we have in the country. And it's important for you guys to understand that this is not only because our, national situation, but also this is a movement of young people that see that their future is constrained by not only the national circumstances, but also the international and global circumstances, because we are living in this planet with an environmental, climate emergency, biodiversity crisis, human rights crisis too, because we have seen how in some countries, the policies and the rights that we have won during a lot of years has been going back. And this is also the case in Colombia, because for example, the peace agreement and other promises that we have as a country has had a lot of challenges to become a reality. And as I said, since we are the majority of the population in the world, we are worried too, and it's also important, as Brighton said, we cannot apologize for feeling worried about our present and our future. And this was part of the demands that we have as young people in the national level, that we are seeing that since we are the most biodiverse country in the world, how we became also the most dangerous country for environmental defenders. Because this is one of the most dangerous countries in the world, in which young people or elder people or whatever who is working for environmental protection is basically getting in risk of its safety, life, and rights. So, these are part of the demands that young people, but also society in general, is like saying we are feeling that the environmental degradation is putting at risk our future, our development, but also we have a lot of national decisions that are prioritizing maybe economics, are prioritizing other policy decisions that are not responding to the massive demands of young people for today and tomorrow. So in this aspect, like climate change possesses a very important place, because climate change is threatening the way that we are living in the planet, and is also threatening the way that we know the planet. The impacts are already felt. We know that the temperature already increased in 1.1 degrees, and also that we will achieve this target of 1.5 degrees in few years. It's not like this is going to happen in 20 or 30 years. They will be in the half of this century that we already will reach this temperature, according to the IPCC, this latest report that we've been also mentioning here. So I think that this is a serious concern on young people, that also we have the climate emergency, but the climate response is not tackling the core, and the core is the human rights too. We cannot allow that climate becomes another topic that is, important, that is relevant, but also the solutions are compromising human rights. And we have seen a lot of false solutions that are being promoted in order to tackle climate change, and in these solutions, for example, the Global South or Colombia, is important because it have a lot of forests, a lot of biodiversity, and a lot of nature. And many of these false solutions that are being promoted at the international level, I consider that are somehow threatening the environmental democracy and the environmental human rights of communities, because we have this bridge between the scientific basis, but also how people from the local communities or in cities or in rural areas can be part of this conversation, because it somehow has a lot of technical stuff behind. And many of these projects that are like promoting carbon solutions are just like focusing in the metrics of the carbon, but not like in the people, and how this is really benefiting people, how the climate solutions are promoting democracy, are promoting sustainability in the local level, are promoting also human rights and their full guarantee in each project. So I hope like I'm getting like this clear, but what I'm saying is that we are seeing a lot of fake solutions, false solutions, and basically these are undermining human rights in some cases, not in all solutions, but in some cases, and we have example of this also in the Colombian level. So this is a message also that we need to recall in the international community, that climate action needs to also tackle gender justice, human rights justice, equity. And this is not an issue that can be just relied or maybe can be just seen in an economic or financial or only in the metrics that are, metrics, but are that, that this does not immediately become in a solution for local issues and an opportunity for local communities to develop. So this is something that we have seen also, and is a demand that the climate movement has at the global level, because we are demanding real solutions that can effectively mitigate climate change, but also adapt our communities and our ecosystems to this new climate system and its variations. And also, I think that that's why we, the youth, has an opportunity in merging this and in supporting climate action that can effectively reduce emissions, but also provide an opportunity for local people to build sustainable cities and territories. And social media, finally, to conclude, maybe has a very important role in this, because when you asked Julia about how to bridge science and policy, I think communications, social media is one way to get more people involved, get this conversation out from the scientific and technical field, and also make it a day-to-day conversation, make it a coffee conversation, make it something that we can just make common and part of our daily life. So I think that social media plays a very important role in this, in identifying how people are talking about climate change, how people relate climate change into their narrative, into their discourses, and into their daily life.
Thank you for that answer. It was really helpful for a lot of audience. I think I saw about 4 questions on social media. I think your answer covers all of them. Chianika, Siomi spoke about how there's a lot of faulty innovations which lead us to the wrong outcomes. But I think that is also one of the barriers that stop a lot of young people to innovate. They are scared that they don't want to get out there and try a solution that fails. So for you who have worked with very rural background, work with people that aren't that educated when it comes to their own profession, what were your challenges when it came to starting this program, starting your project, and at the same time, what views do you have for people who are scared to innovate?
Okay, let me start by saying that for those who are scared to innovate, I can encourage them to be bold enough to come and try something new. In life, you can have a shaky start, but if you push, you persist, at the end of the day, your solution or whatever you're trying to do will pay off. But now to answer the area question of how we got started, it's not easy to innovate for people who are at the bottom of the pyramid. Because if you are not careful, your innovation can push them out. They can't afford it in short. So you need to make sure that you come up, your business model is very innovative in a sense that it can incorporate everyone, even the the low income earners. An example I can give, when we started, we trained farmers in beekeeping, how to do sustainable forest use, but we realized that we were just scratching the surface of the problem. These are the farmers who, on top of being affected by climate change, they are financially excluded, they're digitally excluded, and no one wants to do business with them. And then it forced us to go back to the drawing board and say, okay, what do we do in this case? What other innovation can we actually bring so that it can incorporate the issue of climate change, financial inclusion, and access to market? And this actually gave birth to the project that now we are landing now, called Poland, where we are trying to put these farmers together so that they can actually try to borrow, to lend among themselves. And also when they harvest their product, they can try to advertise and sell on our platform. And also maybe in the near future, we can be sending out smart climate resilience notification early warning systems, so that actually they can be resilient from from both areas. But the point is, challenges are there. As youth, we need to come out and try to take these actions and and be innovative. Thank you.
Ragnar, I'll be moving to you. You have been a social entrepreneur for a majority part of your life as well. Now, one of the aspects of being a young social entrepreneur that people do not believe in you. They're not ready to invest time in you, not ready to invest any resources in you. So how do you recommend the youth to mitigate this challenge of them, number one, to believe in themselves that they have a solution that can empower, that can change the world, and at the same time make others believe that what they are doing can make an impact?
That's a very important question, Maya, and I'll preface it by sharing an African proverb which says, "Not everyone who chased the zebra caught it, but he who caught it chased it." And I think that really provides me with a very good background and understanding of the fact that anybody who wants to solve a problem must take systematic action towards solving that specific problem. And as we've heard from this conversation, we have a wide array of examples and evidence. But what's critical now is how do we transition into taking action? And that requires us to be bold enough, to be determined enough, but to be also open-minded to collaborating and creating alliances with others. Because the time for lone rangers is long gone, where somebody came and solved our problems. It's only us as young people that can work collaboratively to co-create these challenges. But the only thing that I should also emphasize, Myra, is that majority of us who have the ability to join this conversation and have access to the internet have got some levels of privilege. There are hundreds, if not millions, of young people that don't have access to the internet and are not connected. So the only way we can justify privilege as young social entrepreneurs, as young activists, as young change makers, is by doing hard things. If we are able to do hard things, that's the only way that we can justify privilege. And hard things includes reducing food loss and waste. And how can we move towards finding solutions for more healthy, plant-rich diets? How can we look at protecting ecosystems that safeguard, expand, and create new carbon sinks, like what Chianika is doing, and many other young people around? So I believe it's about us doing hard things, and us doing hard things is having resilience and determination. You're going to experience setbacks, you're going to experience social, economic, and cultural barriers. But for you to be able to catch that leopard, you need to chase it. And all of us should work extremely, extremely hard by doing hard things. And hard things also includes ensuring that we are having our innovations and solutions built into the communities that we serve. Because without a stronger community, it's hard for anything that we are doing to succeed, be it an online community and offline community. But also realizing that we are doing this for other young people that don't have the privileges that we have. So how do we redeem ourselves? By being in positions where we do hard things and are willing to extend those solutions to communities that are pushed away from the center. We understand that the global economy has been built on extractives, and we've got enough evidence that that's not the path we need to take. We have answers, we have the solutions, and right now we just need to make sure that we implement these solutions, have them built into the needs of the communities that we serve, and at the same time cross-pollinate innovations and solutions. We have technology, which is a very beautiful opportunity for us to work together. It's easy for me to contact Julia when she's in Europe and think about how we can work together. It's easier for anybody to contact anyone in this generation. So we need to use all these opportunities to our advantage. But also, most importantly, I want to just emphasize the fact that we shouldn't forget about the indigenous communities, young indigenous communities around the world who are working extremely hard to safeguard the ecosystems that support our well-being on this planet. And I just want to congratulate all young people who are part of these communities who are working so hard to restore nature and reverse the loss of biodiversity we've experienced over the years.
Thank you, Brighton. Julia, there is a lot of talk both in our chat and our question box that solutions around climate change cannot be restricted to their own countries. Like a solution, for example, that you might implement in Germany, I can't implement in India. So how do we connect as youth, and how do we achieve the notion of being together while implementing different things in different localities? At the same time, I am not in a coastal town, and my friend, someone else sitting in a coastal town like Brighton in New York, will have to have a set of different issues that he has to tackle. So how do we get together, and how do we work towards achieving and meeting the goals of the Paris Agreement and the SDGs, but at the same time working on different things?
Thank you so much, Maya, for this question. And absolutely, I want to, first of all, connect back to what Brighton was just saying, which is that we have differentiated responsibilities and differentiated abilities to address climate change. And this is something that is just a reality, and that those of us with privilege need to do some of the hard things so that those with less privilege can expend their energies on more important things in their own lives. And some of those things will be hard. And like I said before, you don't go tomorrow and run a marathon. You start with 5K and then you do 10K. But some of those hard things are closer within reach than we might have previously thought. The technologies are scaling up rapidly. They're becoming more and more cost effective. They're competitive with some of the energy technologies we have now are competitive with the old way of doing things. So we don't need to be too pessimistic about the possibility of in the future really having a seat change when it comes to the way that our global economy works. And I would say that as a researcher in a climate institute at the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impacts Research, I've been very much interested in the discussions around climate policy, and especially around the latest IPCC report. And what I've noticed is that there's kind of two different ways of thinking that are emerging. There are those that say we need to do a little bit less. We need to have a little bit less. We need to, invest in different types of fuels and so on. And then there are those who say that's not going to be enough. We need to completely change our global system, and we need to change our way of thinking. And I think that you can have different opinions about this, but my view is that business as usual is not working. So we don't need a little bit less of business as usual. We need a complete change. We need a disruptive way of thinking. We need really a young person's way of thinking. We need young people to come and share their voices, share their experiences, and share their innovations to address climate change. And really, we need a seat change, not just a little bit less of business as usual. And with all due respect, it's not the Richard Bransons of the world that are going to solve airline travel in the context of climate change. It's going to be people like Xiomara, who we need to connect them with the funding that they need. She said that she's having difficulty finding funding. We need to find the funding for these innovators. We need to support them. We need to connect different young people together who have bright new ideas and can support each other through peer-to-peer support networks, like what we support at the International Youth Federation, through mentorship programs, and also different types of trainings. And I invite you to check out what we have available on our website and on our social media. And we really need to put more energy into investing in youth-led and youth-driven approaches to addressing climate change. So I think that maybe I'll leave it there, but I think we need to remember that global solutions will start also locally. So we should support also our own local networks and the efforts that each individual does, as well as within their immediate community. Again, many others on the panel today said that discuss different local solutions that they're involved in, and then connect those activities to global actions as well as global funding sources. And these funding sources should not just be governments. We also need private sector partnerships with governments, public-private partnerships. So that's something maybe the Richard Bransons of the world can help with, but thank you so much.
Thank you, Julia. Brighton, so a question for all panelists. If you had 30 seconds, and I'm going to go one after the other. So I'll start with you, Brighton. If you had 30 seconds with the entire youth assembled in one place without their phones and actually paying attention to you, what would your message be?
I think, as I've always advocated, it's about not being afraid to do the right thing. If you do the right thing, you do good. And don't be afraid to express yourself, because that's the right thing to do.
That's wonderful. Shianika, what would your message be?
Okay, my message is you know, be bold, come out, give the world the solution and save it, yes, and just be happy at the end of the day.
Xiaomi, what would your message be if you found the youth assembled in one place?
We have the tools, we have the knowledge, we have the science, we have the abilities, and just use our youth power to face climate action and also transform it in a new narrative for our growth, our development, and our rights.
Julia, 30 seconds on the clock.
Absolutely. So I would say that youth have two really unique points to add to this debate. Number one, the hope, the ability for hope and limitless potential. And secondly, innovation. So we need to, as young people, bring a feeling of hope as well as our innovative spirit to addressing climate change. And all of this should be through concrete actions that are based in evidence. Thank you very much again for having me on the panel.
Thank you so much. So with those inspiring words, I thank our panelists and audience for being here today. A special mention of gratitude to our panelists and to our hosting partners, the Office of the Secretary General's Envoy on Youth. I also like to thank the Global Secretariat of SDSN Youth, and especially Amy, the lead of our global communications team. In large, I'm very honored to be part of this panel, and I deeply appreciate all the help from my secretariat members who made this panel a huge success. Now, while I was introducing the panelists, I couldn't answer a particular question. What should the tone of my moderation be? Should it be of inspiration, or should it be of more a celebratory nature because of International Youth Day? I now have the answer to that, and that is that I reek of hope. I look ahead for brighter days. And I leave you with this small thought. The world doesn't need one perfect act of kindness. It needs 7.7 billion imperfect ones. So don't wait for the perfect moment to strike or the perfect idea to click. Every idea is going to help our world become a better place for all of us and for all future generations. Thank you once again. Stay safe and take care.